Okay, so picture this. It's 1891. The world is in the middle of this massive industrial revolution. You've got incredible new wealth being created, but at the same time, you have this absolutely crushing poverty for most people. Societies are really starting to fray at the seams. And right in the middle of all this, Pope Leo XIII drops this landmark document called Rerum Novarum, which means of new things. It was a really bold attempt to find a path through the chaos. And in this explainer, we're going to break down how this 19th century text tried to solve a crisis that, let's be honest, we're still grappling with in a lot of ways today. And, this wasn't just some stuffy religious letter. This was the Vatican's big official answer to what it called a spirit of revolutionary change that was just sweeping across the globe. The document dives right into the heart of the conflict. All those fierce debates about capital and labor, wealth and poverty that were splitting societies apart. And while the language used, it is just incredibly stark. I mean, listen to that. That one sentence tells you everything you need to know about how dire they believe the situation was. For the Pope, this wasn't just some abstract economic problem. No, this was a profound moral crisis, and it demanded a direct answer. So, to really get a handle on the solutions that Rerum Novarum offers, we first have to see the world through its eyes. What was the actual problem it was trying to solve? Let's break down that state of unrest back in 1891.
The document paints this picture of just massive disruption. Industry was exploding, right? Creating these enormous fortunes for a handful of people, but leaving the vast majority of workers in what it calls utter poverty. And at the same time, all the old safety nets, things like workers' guilds, they had basically disappeared, leaving individual laborers totally exposed to what the text calls the greed of unchecked competition.
Now, into this chaos comes this powerful new idea that was gaining a lot of ground as a potential solution: socialism. Rerum Novarum doesn't shy away from it at all. In fact, it confronts it directly, and a huge part of the document is dedicated to analyzing it and ultimately rejecting it. First things first, it's really important to understand what the encyclical means when it says socialism. It's zeroing in on one very specific proposal: the idea of getting rid of private property altogether and turning everything over to the community to be managed by the state.
And the critique it offers, man, it is scathing. The argument is that getting rid of private property isn't just wrong, it would actually backfire. It would rob the worker of the fruits of their labor, taking away the whole reason to work hard and improve your life. So far from helping, it would end up giving the state way too much power and lead to, in its words, utter confusion in the community.
And this quote right here, this is basically the final verdict. The conclusion is crystal clear. From the encyclical's point of view, the socialist solution, no matter how good its intentions might seem, is actually worse than the disease. It's rejected because it's seen as a violation of a person's natural rights that would end up hurting the very people it's supposed to help. Okay. So if socialism is off the table, then what is the right answer? Well, the alternative that Rerum Novarum builds starts with a really powerful defense of private property, arguing it's not the problem, but a fundamental part of the solution. And it builds this case on a few really key ideas. Property is the fruit of your labor, right? It's what allows you to plan for the future, to have some security, which is something that separates us from animals. And maybe the biggest point of all, it argues that owning property is essential for a father to be able to provide for his family and build a stable home.
This all leads to a really crucial point. The right to own property doesn't come from the government. The encyclical argues that it's a natural right that existed before any state was ever formed. So the state's job isn't to grant you that right, its job is to protect it.
All right, so with private property locked in as the foundation, what's next? The encyclical then lays out this whole blueprint for how society should work. And the core idea isn't class warfare, it's class cooperation. Now this was a huge challenge to the revolutionary thinking of the day. Instead of just accepting that the rich and the poor are always going to be at war with each other, the encyclical says, no, the exact opposite is true. It paints this picture of capital and labor as two sides of the same coin. You absolutely need both for a society to function. So, how do you get this harmony? Well, the encyclical lays out a list of duties for both sides. For the worker, it means doing your job honestly, respecting property, and staying away from violence or any kind of revolutionary chaos. But, and this is a big but, the responsibilities are just as heavy, maybe even heavier on the employers. They have a duty to respect the human dignity of their workers, not to treat them like cogs in a machine to make more money. This means paying a fair wage, making sure working conditions are safe, and not exploiting people with impossible hours or tasks they can't handle.
So what's the glue that holds these two sides together? The encyclical's answer is really direct. It's Christian morality. Religion is presented as the essential force that can remind both the rich and the poor of their duties to one another, creating a sense of shared justice and common good.
Which brings us to the government's role in all of this. If people and classes have these moral duties, then what is the state supposed to be doing in this cooperative system?
Well, the document argues for what we'd call a limited government. The idea is that the state shouldn't just swallow up the individual or the family. Its job isn't to control every little thing, but to create a stable environment where people and their communities can actually thrive on their own.
But, and this is important, limited does not mean powerless. The state absolutely has a duty to step in when things go off the rails. If there's a threat to public peace, if employers are imposing degrading conditions, if workers' health is in danger, then the public authorities must step in to fix the problem.
And here's a really crucial point. The document says that even though the government has to be fair to everyone, it has a special obligation to the most vulnerable. The rich have their ways of protecting themselves, they have resources, but the poor, they have to rely on the state for that protection. And this special care for the working class is framed as a core duty of any good government.
Okay, let's pull all of this together. So after diagnosing the problem and shooting down what it sees as the wrong answers, what's the actual blueprint that Rerum Novarum proposes for a just society? Well, it really boils down to a three-part plan. First, you secure private property as a non-negotiable right. Second, you ground the whole society in Christian morality so that classes work together instead of fighting. And third, and this was a pretty big deal for 1891, it says we should actively encourage workers to organize and form associations.
And this right here shows you this wasn't just some abstract philosophical text. It had real-world, practical ideas. It gives a powerful thumbs up to workers' unions, seeing them as a vital tool for laborers to protect their own interests, negotiate for fair conditions, and build their own systems of support.
So, when you look at the whole thing, Rerum Novarum was trying to chart a course right down the middle. It wasn't pure hands-off capitalism, and it definitely wasn't state-run socialism. It was proposing a third way, one built on morality, mutual duty, and the rights of the family and the worker. And that leaves us with a really big question for today. More than a century later, as we keep debating the right rules for the market, the state, and the individual, how much of our own arguments are just echoes of those first laid out in this foundational document?